August 25, 1972, Kara, Japan, in the Kochi prefecture on the island of Shikoku. A 13-year-old boy by the name of Michio Seo is on his way home from school when he spots something strange in a nearby rice field. A small object seemed to be floating a few feet above the rice paddies. The object, no bigger than a softball, moved back and forth as Michio watched in amazement. Not understanding what he was seeing, he moved in to get a closer look. As he approached the small object, it stopped in midair and projected a blinding light. Fearful for his life, he turned and ran from the strange object, not stopping until he reached his house. Still curious as to what the object could have been, he confided in his friends about his experience. They soon convinced him that they should go back and investigate. 4 hours later, the young teens arrived at the rice field where the object was first seen. Much to everyone's surprise, the object was still there. Hovering approximately 18 meters away, the object looked like a small metal hat or bell. The boys watched in wonder as the object moved from one end of the field to the other as the sun slowly set in the background. Once dusk was upon them, they noticed that the object began to emit pulsating colors. One boy defiantly moved within feet of the object when it suddenly stopped and immediately began producing a deafening clicking sound. The teens quickly turned and ran towards home. Scared by what they had witnessed, the group decided to stay clear of the field for a while, but after a few days, curiosity once again brought them back, but the object was no longer there. Determined, the boys staked out the field, this time armed with a camera, in hopes of the object's return. They were not disappointed. 4 days later, the group approached the field when they noticed something lying on the ground. It was the metal object they had seen before. One of the teens smartly snapped a picture of the item. As if sensing the flash from the camera, the object quickly lifted off the ground. The group, now frozen with fear, stood and watched as the object began pulsating with light and then dropped back to the ground. One of the teens, without thinking, picked up the object. He would later say that it felt as if it had something moving inside it. They quickly put it in a plastic bag and into a backpack for safekeeping. Once home, they examined the mysterious object more carefully. On the bottom, they found what appeared to be engravings of waves and 2 bird-like symbols, one of which was intersected by an unidentifiable object. The next day, they took the object to one of the fathers of the teens, a Dr. Mutsi Fujimoto, who was the director of the Center for Scientific Education in the city of Kochi. Dr. Fujimoto examined the object, but could not readily identify it. Having not seen it levitate, he thought the boys had simply found some trinket alongside the road and thus dismissed it as such. Dr. Fujimoto would later be quoted as saying, "One of my biggest scientific regrets is not having examined the object more closely when I had the chance." Dismayed, the boys placed the object on a shelf, but in 2 days' time the object had mysteriously disappeared. Not knowing what had happened to it, on a hunch they went back to the rice field and found the object once again hovering in midair. Over the course of the next several weeks, many, including Dr. Fujimoto, witnessed the object time and again. Determined to capture it once more, the boys devised a plan. They noticed it never appeared when it was raining. Armed with a bucket of water and wet rags, they returned to the field. As they approached, they saw the object once again on the ground, humming. They quickly covered it with wet rags and turned it over to pour water into the holes on the bottom. Immediately, the object began to make a loud noise along with what sounded like sparks emanating from inside. Once home, they took more photos and created drawings to study. Wanting to know how it worked, they tried to find a way to open the item, but to no avail. They even took a hammer to the object, but could not even make a mark. Aside from the strange engravings, the only other information they could gather was obtained by looking through the holes on the bottom, where they claimed to have seen what appeared to be complicated electronics. The group thought it best to take the object back to Dr. Fujimoto so he could confirm what the boys had seen through the holes. In order not to lose the object, they placed it in a container of water and inside a canvas bag. Worried the object might escape, they tied the canvas bag closed with a rope and looped it around the wrist of one of the boys as they rode their bikes to Dr. Fujimoto's house. Halfway to their destination, the boy in charge of the bag came to an abrupt stop. He claimed that he felt the rope tug sharply. Fearful of the worst, the boys untied the rope, opened the bag, and pulled out the container of water, only to find the object had vanished. They had all witnessed it being placed into the container and into the bag. It never left their side as the bag was tied up, and even while they were on their bikes. It simply and inexplicably had vanished. Over the months, the boys would attempt to capture the object again and again, but with no success. As one of the boys said, the object seemed to have learned from its past mistakes. Over the years, others would also report seeing the object in the same field, but to date, the Kara object has yet to be explained, making the case one of the most enigmatic in history. May 26, 1974. Fort George Island, 30 minutes east of Jacksonville, Florida. Terry Betts, a young medical student, and his parents were surveying the damage to the family's land from a recent forest fire when they stumbled upon an object that would forever change their lives. Laying in the ashes was a highly polished metal ball, approximately 8 inches in diameter. The sphere had no identifying marks other than a triangle pattern stamped into the surface. At first, the family thought they had stumbled upon a satellite that had fallen from orbit and started the fire upon impact, but no crater was detected, nor was there any damage to the sphere. The metallic orb was still highly polished and clean. With no explanation at hand, Terry picked up the 22-pound ball and placed it in the trunk of the family car to use as a decorative item in his room. Days passed and the fascination with the sphere diminished until one day Terry was playing guitar in his room. As he was strumming chords, he noticed the ball started to dance around on the shelf where he had left it. At first, Terry thought it was just rolling around from vibrations outside his wall, but as he continued to play, he noticed that the sphere reacted more strongly to certain notes on his guitar. After a few minutes, it began to vibrate on its own. It also emitted high-pitched tones, annoying the family dog. But this was only the beginning of the strange happenings for the Betts household. Later, family members were quoted as saying the music must have triggered something inside the sphere, because from that day forward, the sphere took on a mind of its own. It began to roll throughout the house under its own power, even periodically stopping and starting again without any assistance from family members. One time, it rolled around the house for 12 minutes straight, defying all known laws of physics. During sunny days, the sphere was livelier, while on cloudy days, it moved slower throughout the house. Terry began to perform experiments to test the sphere. One of the first experiments had the sphere placed on a glass table. It would quickly roll to the edge, stop, reverse course, and roll to the opposite edge, eerily searching for a way off the table, but never falling. He even tilted the table to force the sphere to fall, yet it defiantly would not succumb to gravity, baffling everyone. Another observation came when people tried to shake the sphere. While it would give off a slight rattling sound, once the sphere was placed back down, it would immediately move away from the person who shook it, often speeding away around corners, attempting to hide. The family was so frightened by the sphere's ability to travel freely throughout their house under its own volition that they decided to lock it up and bring in experts for answers. The family reached out to the Jacksonville Journal. The paper sent out seasoned journalist Lon Enger to investigate. Enger, who fully expected to disprove the allegations, was instantly a believer. Having seen it with his own eyes, Enger was later quoted as saying, "Everything that has been said about the object is true." Journalists and scientists alike soon clamored to have the sphere properly tested in a laboratory environment, but the Betts family chose to only allow testing and inspection at their home, fearing that sending the orb off to a lab might mean losing it forever. Soon experts from all over the world descended upon St. George Island to get a glimpse of the mystery sphere. All of the attention soon piqued the interest of NASA and the U.S. military. Upon seeing the sphere in action, a Marine spokesman said publicly that the ball's erratic behavior was inexplicable and that the origin of the sphere could not be determined. As the world took interest in the mystical object, the orb took on even more mysterious behaviors. Music began to emanate from the orb. In addition, the Betts household began to experience poltergeist activity as doors and windows would open and close on their own. No longer being able to withstand the bizarre activity, the family finally decided to send the orb off for testing in April of '74. The U.S. Navy requested the sphere be sent to the nearby naval station in Jacksonville. There, scientists began to study the object, but were immediately baffled. Attempts to analyze the object failed when X-rays could not penetrate the metal surface. The Navy finally brought in a powerful 300 kV X-ray machine. With the stronger machine, naval scientists discovered something unusual. 2 round objects surrounded by an unidentifiable halo material with significant density. They also noted that the orb possessed 4 different non-concentric magnetic poles, 2 positive and 2 negative. After 2 weeks, the Navy returned the orb to the Betts family and concluded, We cannot identify the origin of the sphere, nor be 100% sure of the metallic composition. With questions still unanswered, Dr. Carl Wilson from the Omega-1 Institute in Louisiana examined the sphere and added, "The sphere has radio waves coming from it and a magnetic field around it." And the field appeared to fluctuate in potency based on an as yet unidentified pattern, defying the known laws of physics. Next was Dr. James Albert Harder, a professor emeritus of civil and hydraulic engineering at the University of California at Berkeley, who through closer study concluded that the two internal spheres are made of elements far heavier than anything known to science at this time. Because of this, he also asserted, if one were to drill into the sphere, perhaps the masses would go critical and explode like an atomic bomb. From the beginning, the tabloid newspaper, the National Enquirer, had offered a $50,000 reward for any proof of alien origin of the object. With mystery still surrounding the sphere even after professional testing, the tabloid assembled a blue ribbon panel to investigate the object. The panel consisted of such notables as Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. James Albert Harder, Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle, biologist Frank B. Salisbury, and Dr. Robert F. Cregan. After a week of extensive testing and discussion, the panel was just as baffled and amazed as those who had tested the orb before, and in summation could neither refute nor provide any further information beyond the previous academic studies of the mystery object. Based on this conclusion, the National Enquirer doubled its offer to $1 million. To date, no one has claimed the $1 million prize, and while there have been many theories, no one has been able to come forth with a legitimate origin for the mystery sphere, nor a plausible explanation as to how it functions on its own, making the Betz mystery sphere one of the most enigmatic mysteries in recorded history. Pacific Palisades, California, July 17, 2015. An anonymous call came into the LA County Police Station that afternoon, alerting authorities to the location of a body. While the call was not out of the ordinary for LA County, the case was to become one of the most mysterious in history. As police arrived at the designated location, they discovered a man in his 60s lying dead in the driver's seat of a parked car. Identification found on the body identified the man as Jeffrey Lash, a local resident. A coroner's report would later find that Mr. Lash had died of natural causes, stage 4 cancer. But what baffled the authorities was the fact that Lash had no fingerprints. They had not been burned off nor filed. Instead, Mr. Lash was born without fingerprints. Little did the police know that this was only one of many mysterious and unexplainable things to come. Even though homicide was ruled out, the lack of fingerprints forced investigators to confirm Mr. Lash's identity. They started by searching his residence, where they made an astonishing discovery: a cache of over 1,500 firearms, 6.5 tons of ammunition, other miscellaneous weapons such as crossbows, knives, and explosives, and tucked in a drawer, over $230,000 in cash. Police were perplexed at who this man was and what he was doing with such an arsenal. When questioned, neighbors were baffled as to how he had managed to stockpile thousands of weapons in his home when they never saw Mr. Lash with any packages, nor any deliveries being made to his house. Police then reached out to Lash's longtime fiancée, Catherine Nebron. During questioning, they were surprised to learn that Miss Nebron had actually been with Lash when he died. She then, with the help of an employed assistant, moved the car to the current location and called their attorney, Harlan Braun, who gave the police the anonymous tip. According to the attorney, Lash became ill in the parking lot of a Santa Monica grocery store and died soon after, despite the efforts of Miss Nebron to resuscitate him. The attorney continued, saying that Lash had told Nebron not to call 911. When Miss Nebron was asked why he would make that request, her answer stunned police. Miss Nebron told authorities that Jeffrey Lash was employed by the shadow government as an intelligence officer. His assignment was to accumulate weapons, cash, and vehicles for an upcoming mission to save the world. Yet the most astonishing and bizarre part of the story was the statement made by Nebron, saying that for the past 17 years she had personally known that Mr. Lash was an alien hybrid, half human, half alien, hence no fingerprints. Because of his unique hybrid physiology, he believed that alien agents would come to retrieve his body when he passed. Thus, for their own protection, she and the assistant Miss Vaderbunker notified their attorney of the body's location and then fled north to Oregon until things had settled. Under normal circumstances, police would have chalked this up as a bad alibi. But since there was no foul play involved, nor charges leveled against Miss Nebron or Vadbunker, they just found it baffling. Upon further investigation of Vadbunker's status as an employed assistant to Mr. Lash, people learned that her job function was to locate and secure storage facilities for his arsenal. She provided the authorities with numerous additional locations, yielding even more arms and dozens of assault vehicles, including vehicles capable of going underwater. By now, the federal authorities were involved in the investigation. Of primary concern was how a man of presumably simple financial means could have accumulated an armory now valued at over $6 million. After tracing the weapons and ammunition, it was discovered that all of the purchases had been made legally and with cash. At first, authorities thought that Lash must have been involved in drugs in order to amass the millions of dollars needed to make the purchases, but neither the police nor federal authorities could find any evidence, circumstantial or direct, linking Lash to drugs or any other illegal activity. When Miss Nebron and Vadbunker were questioned about where the money had come from, they claimed his alien brethren within the shadow government helped to secure the funds needed. We may never know who Jeffrey Lash was or how he paid for what amounts to be one of the largest personal armories in U.S. history, but in a weird twist it was later discovered that Jeffrey Lash was the son of Joseph Lash, who collaborated with Dr. Elmer Belt, the famed doctor who pioneered sex-change surgery techniques. Is this a strange coincidence, or a link to the alien hybrid origin that Mr. Lash claimed? The federal authorities have taken the stance to no longer comment on the case, or even to confirm if there's an ongoing investigation, making the mystery of Jeffrey Lash one of the most enigmatic stories in history. October 1989. Steve and Don Hess were looking forward to a nice quiet weekend of camping. Leaving the kids with the grandparents, they headed towards the Mojave National Reserve. Steve had borrowed a camper from a friend, and the two were planning on camping at the Mid-Hills Campground, not far from the California-Nevada border. Once the couple arrived, they were disappointed to find that the campground was full. Not to be denied the weekend that they had planned, the couple decided to drive further down the road and spend the night in the open desert. The couple set up camp just as the sun was setting. As they sat around the campfire enjoying the stars in the night sky, they noticed some stars that appeared to be in the shape of the letter M. As they stared in wonder, they began to see smaller red lights descending from the strange stars. Baffled at first, they soon believed it to be military troops parachuting from planes or helicopters, but they heard no sounds. Soon the wonder turned to concern as the red lights landed on the ground and began quickly moving towards the couple. Feeling that they were in the path of some war game, the couple ran into the camper for safety. They never expected what happened next. As the lights came closer, they confirmed that they were some sort of night vision goggles emitting red light. However, they were not worn by military troops as first thought, but instead by something not of this world. As they surrounded the camper, the couple saw the creatures up close. They appeared to be small, alien, impish beings. The aliens soon completely surrounded the camper. All of a sudden, the couple heard a deafening low hum. The camper began to shake violently and was engulfed in a bright light. The couple fell to their knees as the camper, they would later describe, felt as if it were being lifted off the ground. They looked out the windows to see the ground fall away as the hum grew louder, and an eerie mist began to fill the camper, rendering the couple unconscious. The next thing they remember was waking up. It was morning. The couple stepped out of the camper, noticing significant damage to the outside of the vehicle, confirming what they had remembered experiencing the night before. They immediately headed home, hoping to put the unexplained experience behind them. Unfortunately, it would continue to haunt them. Over the course of the next few weeks, the couple had nightmares and trouble sleeping. Wanting to get their lives back, a friend recommended they see Dr. Annixter, who specialized in regression therapy for post-traumatic syndrome. Dr. Annixter hypnotized Steve and Don in an attempt to find them peace. Instead, he discovered the rest of what happened that night. Hypnotized individually, both Steve and Don described the camper being taken up into what they believed to be a spaceship. The aliens, through telepathy, had the couple exit the safety of the camper and were escorted to separate examination rooms where tests were performed. Dawn recounts being given some sort of injection in the neck. She then said that the aliens did reproductive tests on her. Upon wakening from hypnosis, the doctor examined Dawn and found 2 red marks in the same spot she said she had been given the injection. Adding more intrigue, Dawn confided in the doctor that she was pregnant. Tests showed that conception happened around the time of the alleged abduction. While the couple claims they have no idea how she would have gotten pregnant in that time frame, 9 months later, Dawn gave birth to a healthy baby girl. What really happened that night? Did the aliens aid the couple in conceiving a child? Is this child fully human? Or is this merely a hoax? Only Steve, Dawn, and perhaps their alleged abductors know for sure, making the Mojave Encounter one of the most enigmatic accounts on record. Woolpit, England, 1100s. Villagers were preparing for the upcoming local harvest when they were startled by a peculiar sight. A young boy and girl approximately 6 to 8 years of age stumbled into the center of the quiet village. A local herdsman had found them lying in a pit dug to trap wolves. No one recognized the two children, and the nearest settlement was far beyond walking distance for such small children. Their clothing was like nothing anyone had seen before, colorful and uniquely constructed from unrecognizable materials. But what was most startling was the color of their skin. It was green. When approached for questioning, the villagers could sense the children were lost and frightened, but communication was difficult as the two spoke in a language not familiar to the townspeople. They could make out certain words that seemed to have their origins in Latin and French, which helped them to eventually develop the dialogue with the two. The children appeared to be starving, so the village women brought meats and baked goods for them to eat, but the children, even though very hungry, refused to eat the food. Some found the sight of the children frightening and requested they be locked up for everyone's safety. Not knowing what to do with the children, they took them to a nearby barn to sleep for the night. When morning came, the villagers found the children asleep. Having refused the food offered the night before, everyone was baffled when they discovered that the children had broken into the raw beans stored in the barn, stuffing their mouths with as much as they could take until they fell asleep from gluttony. Inexplicably, beans would become the only food the two would eat for the next few months until they acclimated to normal food items, which the children initially called strange. Over the course of a few weeks, the children, through a mix of sign language and the English they had learned, told the villagers of how they became lost. The girl told them she and her brother lived in St. Martin's Land, a place that no one had ever heard of, nor has there ever been any record of its existence. She said that they were searching for one of their father's lambs when they saw it wander into a cave near the river. They followed the lamb into a small cavern. Hearing bells and seeing light at the other end, they followed the corridor until they came out into blinding light, dazed and bewildered. They did not recognize the place, and the sky was far brighter than it ever was in St. Martin's Land. When asked what she meant by that, the young girl explained that in St. Martin's Land, the sky was always what the villagers interpreted as dusk or twilight. The girl explained that while the sky was bright enough to see, there was no sun, a word which the villagers had to teach the pair. When asked why their skin was the color green, she said that everyone's skin was that color where she lived. For the next few weeks, the children, along with the villagers, searched for the opening the children allegedly came through. With no success in finding their way back to their home, a local landowner, Sir Richard Duquesne, took the children into his household to raise them. The boy, who was constantly ill, soon died. The girl survived and eventually lost her green hue and took the name Agnes. As an adult, she married a local official, an ambassador to King Henry II, named Richard Barr, from the nearby town of King's Lyon. It's also said that the current Earl Ferrers is descended from the strange girl through intermarriage. While the story sounds of myth and legend, it is not. The historical record clearly shows that the children did in fact exist. The first historical account was chronicled by William of Newburgh in his published work, The Historia Rerum Anglicarum, History of English Affairs. A second account was offered by Ralph of Coggeshall, who was the 6th abbot of Coggeshall's Abbey in Essex, in his Chronicum Anglicanum, where he also accounts an interview with Sir Richard Duquesne, the landowner who took the children in. The green children of Woolpit are still revered by the local community, and to this day are adorned upon their village emblem. While some locals believe the children came through a portal in space and time, others believe that they came from inner Earth, noting the constant twilight of the sky mentioned by the girl. Regardless of their origin, the children of Woolpit remains one of the most enigmatic stories in history. In a small town just north of São Paulo, Brazil, one of the most horrifying poltergeist events in history is about to unfold. The year is 1965 and the Ferreira family household, having just awakened, is baffled. Several large stones are lying on the floor throughout the house. The stones had not been there when the family had gone to bed the night before. After questioning the children and checking the doors and windows, the family had no idea how the rocks got into the house. Puzzled, they gathered the rocks and placed them outside. Within minutes, the rocks, much to the dismay of the family, appeared back inside the house. Much to the amazement of everyone, the strange activity continued. Rocks, and sometimes bricks, would be found throughout the house, some as large as 8 pounds. By now the police were involved, but were just as baffled. On one occasion, an officer called at the house had just thrown out a sizable rock when another fell from the ceiling, landing at his feet. He would later describe it as appearing out of thin air, as if by magic. By now the townspeople had flocked to witness the poltergeist commotion. As interest grew, the activity took on a new dimension. It began to focus solely on the 11-year-old daughter, Maria. The poltergeist would inexplicably leave gifts at young Maria's feet. It became so prevalent that Maria would whisper that she wanted flowers or sweets, and they would magically appear at her feet, seemingly out of thin air. Fruit, and even in one instance jewelry, were presented by the spirit. As time went on, the events no longer just happened while Maria was at home, but followed her all over town, even while at school. Hundreds witnessed the paranormal appearance of gifts, including politicians, police officers, military, and even the clergy. But no one could explain how or why this was happening. For a year, the activities continued until one day in 1967, the spirit stopped leaving gifts and instead turned to violence. Stones from the street, as if by an invisible hand, would be hurled at Maria. Eggs would appear out of thin air, striking the young girl. At first, people thought it was someone jealous of the attention Maria was receiving, but the violence would even happen inside locked rooms, in front of witnesses. Rocks, eggs, plates, even a propane tank appeared out of thin air to the dismay of bystanders, flying through the air, striking poor Maria. The activity even plagued her while she slept. Cups and bowls would mysteriously appear, covering her mouth in an attempt to thwart her breathing. Church members would hold nightly vigils in her room while she slept so they could remove the items from her face. Over time, the violence was no longer restricted to the use of objects. Bruises, scratches, and even bite marks soon began to mysteriously appear on her body. The family, fearful for Maria's health, turned to the church, who performed an exorcism, but to no avail. Instead, as if angered by the ritual, the spirit escalated the violence. Over the course of the next few weeks, pins and sewing needles began appearing, embedded under Maria's skin. Doctors, not believing the story of a malevolent spirit, thought that Maria was doing this to herself until they witnessed the phenomenon firsthand. During a visit to the doctor for a routine exam, Maria's ankle began to swell up before their eyes. She screamed in agony as perplexed doctors began removing over 50 needles from underneath her skin. No matter where she was, Maria was not safe from the poltergeist. One day at school, Maria was eating her lunch in the corner, isolated from others due to the violence that surrounded her. She bit into her sandwich when she felt something on her arm. As she looked down, she saw her clothes burst into flames. Teachers quickly extinguished the fire, but they could not quell the fear of the children who witnessed the horror. The danger followed Maria home that day, as inexplicably one of the bedrooms in her house caught fire and destroyed everything in it. By now, with so many witnesses stepping forward, the nation was well aware of Maria's plight and began to clamor for famed Brazilian psychic and medium Chico Xavier to intervene. In a live public event, Mr. Xavier met with Maria. With the eyes of the nation watching, he went into his famed trance to make contact with the spirit world. While in his trance, he declared to onlookers the reason behind the vicious attacks. He claimed that Maria had been a witch in a previous life, one that practiced black magic. Her actions harmed many, even killing one person, according to the psychic. The poltergeist was determined to make Maria suffer, he said, just as she had made others suffer in her previous life. While the Brazilian public was split on whether this was the reason for the haunting, united, they focused their thoughts and prayers on Maria in an attempt to rid the poor girl of her unseen tormentor. After 5 years of terror, the violence was finally about to end. Maria came home from school, opened a can of soda as she did every day, and took a drink. It would be her last. For the soda was laced with pesticides, killing her in seconds. With no witnesses to Maria's death, the coroner ruled it as a suicide, claiming, "Maria's torment was so well documented that it's perfectly understandable as to why she would want to end her life." To this day, many do not believe that Maria took her own life, even though they can sympathize with her pain. Instead, they believe the poltergeist finally got its revenge. With Maria's untimely death, the paranormal activity immediately ended, but her story remains one of the most enigmatic in history. November 1949, Prague, Czechoslovakia. A young scientist by the name of Karel Dubral walked into the patent office with an application for what he thought was a great cost-savings idea. Little did he know that while his idea would be ridiculed for decades, it would later prove to be revolutionary. Dubral was trying to address a problem. Shaving razors were in short supply in Eastern Europe. The longer one could make a blade last, the better. Dubral had been following the studies of Anton Bovis, a 1930s French ironmonger and pendulum-dowsing author. Bovis had noticed that the items in the king's chamber within the Great Pyramid seemed to take longer to spoil than those just outside of the chamber. Dubral, having a background in magnetics, believed that it might have something to do with the alignment of the Earth's magnetic field. After trial and error, Dubral discovered that a straight razor's edge would degrade more slowly when stored underneath the pyramidal shape it aligned to the Earth's north-south magnetic field. The patent office initially refused his application until they could replicate his findings in their own experiments. Much to the surprise of many, they did in fact reach the same results and thus awarded him the patent. While the test by Dubral and the patent office showed positive results, there was no scientific data or explanation as to the how and why this worked. Because of this, few took the discovery seriously. For decades, amateurs would try to duplicate the results without success. Many claimed the idea was a mere flight of fancy, citing that there is no evidence that pyramids possess mystical powers. Even the popular TV show Mythbusters ran an experiment attempting to keep food fresher using pyramid power, but with no success. Over the decades, many continued to call Dubral's assertions hokum, until 2001, when noted physicist Dr. Vladimir Koznoholovets, the preeminent condensed matter physicist attached to the Institute of Physics, Academy of Sciences in Kiev, Ukraine, was working on commercialization techniques of the inerton theory, the recently discovered phenomenon of elementary particles moving through space and their effect on matter. Using the applications of inerton theory, Dr. Koznoholovets discovered that microbes thrive within various geometric shapes when aligned with the Earth's magnetic field. On a hunch, he replicated Dubral's experiments using scientific methods and modern measuring equipment. He soon discovered that, in fact, Dubral was correct. Dr. Koznoholovets published his findings along with the data and pictures in notable peer-reviewed scientific journals. Dr. Koznoholovets concluded that the power is not from the pyramid, as Dubral speculated, but from the inerton field aligned with the magnetic lines. The geometric shape merely helps to align the particle field. It is important to note that while these findings are conclusive, the actual difference between the razor blades in the control group and those placed in the pyramid is minute, and only detectable using a high-powered electron microscope, making Dubral's initial assertions back in 1949 more of a subjective opinion than fact, considering he did not possess the tools needed to actually prove his hypothesis. Did the Egyptians know of this phenomenon, or did they just make a logical architectural decision when designing the pyramids? Regardless, since 2001, more than 700,000 patents have been applied for, utilizing the principles found in inerton theory. From universities to governments, everything from biological research to food containers and storage have been employing the principles of this discovery. While research is ongoing in understanding the effects, the results are conclusive, making the Dubral patent one of the most enigmatic mysteries of our time. Blackheath, England, 1907. In a suburb outside of London, a precocious 3-year-old girl by the name of Dorothy Louise Eady slipped while walking down the stairs in her family's home. Little did anyone realize that this event would forever change the lives of many. Hearing the noise, her parents rushed to find Dorothy at the bottom of the stairs, unconscious and not breathing. The family doctor was immediately brought over and pronounced the young girl dead. The doctor placed her body on a bed and went to make arrangements. Upon returning a few minutes later, the doctor found Dorothy sitting up, wide awake, playing with her dolls. While physically Dorothy seemed to be fine, she soon began exhibiting strange behaviors, such as not recognizing common items or easily being scared of ordinary noises. The strangest took a bizarre turn when one day she began demanding that she be taken home. When her parents asked what she meant by that, she explained that she lived in a place where buildings were made of stone. Thinking that this was just the vivid imagination of a child, the parents ignored her pleas. Then one day Dorothy had been given a picture book full of images from around the world. After turning the page to a picture depicting ancient Egypt, she eagerly shouted, "This is my home." She quickly became obsessed with Egypt, and her demands to be taken home escalated. While her parents were concerned with her fixation, they attempted to quell her obsession with a visit to the Egyptian exhibit at the British Museum in London. Immediately, Dorothy ran to the statues and began kissing their feet. When her parents pulled her back, she claimed she knew these people. She pointed to the statue of Seti and said that she knew him and described him as a kindly old man. But what worried her parents even more was that Dorothy began running around the exhibit speaking in an unknown language. From that day forward, Dorothy continually begged her parents to take her to the museum, so much so that by the time she was 10, she spent nearly every weekend at the Egyptian exhibit. It was there that the caretaker of the Egyptian antiquities for the British Museum, E.A. Walsbudge, took notice of the young girl's amazing knowledge. He mentioned that the museum offered classes in Egyptology. Dorothy quickly enrolled. Within weeks, her instructor was amazed that a child could learn hieroglyphics so quickly, saying, "What took adults years to barely grasp, a young girl has mastered in mere weeks." When asked how she did this, she simply said she had already learned it once before. It was during this time that Dorothy claimed that she had been born in ancient Egypt in the city of Abydos. She began to write a detailed account of her life in the ancient city of Abydos. She recounted customs and practices that not even scholars were aware of at the time, but what scholars found most perplexing is that she wrote the entire account, all 72 pages, in flawless, cursive, hieroglyphic text, a feat that very few scholars could do, let alone a young schoolgirl. Dorothy continued to exhibit mysterious knowledge of ancient Egypt, baffling scholars around the world, but it wasn't until her early 20s that Dorothy finally got her wish and moved to Egypt with her new husband, an Egyptian she had met back in London. They moved near the Giza Plateau, where she met famed archaeologist Salim Hassan, who immediately recognized her as someone with exceptional knowledge and recommended her for a position at the Egyptian Department of Antiquities, which was unheard of for someone with no education on the subject. She soon began working with archaeologists from around the world and helping them to understand Egyptian culture and translate hieroglyphs, even though she was not Egyptian nor possessed any formal education on the subject. Later in life, Dorothy moved to Abydos, a city from her dreams. It was there that the Temple of Seti resides. She took the name Seti and began working on translating the temple's journals and books, which had stumped experts for decades. Her knowledge surpassed anything found in books at the time and baffled the experts. By now, she openly claimed that she had lived there in a past life, but even with her proven expertise, many attempted to test her assertions of a past life. The director of the Department of Antiquities asked her to enter a room in the Temple of Seti that had been kept locked for years. He brought her into the chamber in complete darkness and asked her what was on the walls. Seti said that she had been there many times before in her past life and began pointing and translating the hieroglyphs, even though the wall paintings had never been published nor viewed by the outside world, not to mention that she could not see them because the room was in complete darkness. Once Seti told archaeologists to dig in a certain location because she remembered a garden at that location. Much to the surprise of many, upon excavating the site, they found the garden. On another occasion, Seti informed archaeologists of the location of the tomb of Nefertiti, a tomb experts had been trying to locate for decades. It wasn't until after her death that they took her seriously and found the royal chamber right where she said it was. While scholars cringed at Seti's overt claim of reincarnation, no one ever labeled her crazy. Her expertise was valued too much by scholars, and as one put it, reincarnation is about the only explanation as to her knowledge of ancient Egypt. Her knowledge was so profound and uncanny that Egyptian government, in a once-in-a-lifetime move, made an exception to the country's law of mandatory retirement because the government found her knowledge too valuable and wanted to continue to utilize her unique expertise. Seti passed in 1981, but to this day scholars still pore over her notes and journals looking for information of a lost civilization, making the reincarnation of Seti one of the most enigmatic stories of our time. Australia, December 1st, 1948. It's a typical sunny day in Glenelg, a small coastal community south of Adelaide. Tourists were enjoying the tranquility of Somerton Beach when the serenity was broken by a gruesome discovery: a body lying on the shoreline just below the boardwalk. People gathered, straining to get a view, as the local constable and his men huddled around the man's body. At first glance, he simply appeared to be sleeping. His legs were crossed, and a half-smoked cigarette lay on his shirt collar. He did not appear to have drowned, nor were there any signs of injury or foul play. A toxicology report showed that there were no toxins or poisons found in the body. The coroner was baffled as to the cause of death. Identifying the man proved to be just as baffling. No ID or identifying marks were found on the man's body, nor did he match any missing person's description. As police began to examine the man's belongings, they noticed that all of the labels had been torn from his clothing. In his pockets were found a pack of chewing gum, cigarettes, matches, a comb, a used bus ticket, and an unused train ticket to neighboring Henley Beach. What puzzled police even more was that they couldn't find any fingerprints on the items, including those of the dead man's. As they continued searching, they found a secret pocket in his trousers. Inside there was a scrap of paper which appeared to have been torn out of a book with the words, "Taman should." After further research, it was discovered that the words on the scrap of paper meant "finished." The print on the paper matched that found in a book entitled Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and thus a nationwide search was launched to find the book from which the piece had been torn from. Following up on the unused train ticket, the police found an abandoned suitcase which they believed to be the man's. Inside the suitcase were strange items: a modified kitchen knife, scissors, thread which matched the thread in the man's clothing, another pack of gum, and a shaving kit. It also contained a few articles of clothing with all the labels torn, with the exception of the tie and a laundry bag, both bearing the name Thomas Keene. Search of that name yielded no information. The mystery had hit a dead end. It wasn't until 8 months later when a local man walked into the Glen Elk police station. He told police that he had been parked near the beach in December and found a strange book left in his car when he returned. It had been sitting in his glove box until he recently read a newspaper article about the search for the book. The book was a perfect match, but what intrigued police even more were the faint impressions discovered on the back cover. There appeared to be a phone number and a cryptic message. The phone number, as it turned out, belonged to a young nurse who told them she had given the book to a Mr. Boxall. Police now believed they had identified the mystery man, until it was discovered that Mr. Boxall was alive and well in New South Wales, with his copy of the book intact with an inscription from the young nurse. Another dead end. The police then turned to the suspicious code they lifted from the back cover. Examined under ultraviolet light, they could see 5 lines of letters, some of which had been crossed out. They sent the code to the Department of Naval Intelligence, who eventually told them the code was unbreakable. They then published the code in multiple newspapers across the world in hopes that an amateur codebreaker could discover the message, but to no avail. The case, after over 5 years, had hit its last dead end. Today, the grave of the unknown man still remains in Glen Elk, a favorite tourist attraction. Over the decades, many theories have surfaced about the identity of the Somerton man, from a man who simply passed out on the beach and died, to a spy who had been assassinated by foreign agents. Several individuals have even claimed to be related to the deceased, even a connection to Thomas Jefferson. But to date, no evidence has been presented to his true identity, making the Somerton man one of the most enigmatic stories in history.